There was me. That is, Vinny. And this is my tier list. I should probably do that intro to the Clockwork Orange soundtrack, but Barry Lyndon soundtrack. This video is going to get Mondo claimed, but I don't really care. This is just something I wanted to do for fun. Welcome to this video, where I rank the films of Stanley Kubrick. I've been meaning to do something like this for a while, but recently a podcast I listened to, Blank Check, is doing a thing on all of the movies of Kubrick. And it made me realize just how much these movies have been a part of the fabric of my being. Like, since I was probably too young, even. So, we'll get into that, per movie. There are some of his movies I haven't seen, and some I don't remember. Well, one I don't remember. But the most important ones I've seen upwards of a dozen times. You know, so let's do it. Let's rank the films of Stanley Kubrick. First, let me just go ahead and put Killer's Kiss here, because I haven't seen it. The Killing, 2 movies with the name Kill. And those are his early films, along with Fear and Desire. I mean, apparently they're perfectly good movies. They're, you know, 50s movies. I just haven't gotten around to watching them. So maybe one day. I also haven't seen Lolita. So there goes almost half of his filmography. However, you'll notice probably by the video length that there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to start with Spartacus, which I'm going to put in the B tier. Now, you'll notice I've edited the tiers because I don't think Kubrick has a bad movie of the ones I've seen, and they're all ridiculously good. And some would say that his movies, every time he attempted a new genre, his movie was the best in that genre. I don't agree with that necessarily, but I do think he didn't, in my personal opinion, like this whole video will be, I don't think Stanley Kubrick ever failed at a genre. Now, I know Lolita was influential, so I haven't seen that, but Spartacus was actually his gun for hire, director for hire movie, and it is probably, you know, just a very commercial thing for him at the time, and he probably did it just because, I don't remember the full story, but it's like, Stanley, if you do this, maybe you will get a blank check. I don't know. It's a fine movie. It is gladiatorial stuff. There's the meme. No, I am Spartacus. I am Spartacus. I haven't seen this movie in, like, God, 20 years, 15 years or so. So I don't remember it entirely. But the movie, from what I remember, was very fun, very watchable, really impressive scenes, giant crowds. And this showed that Kubrick could handle a movie of this caliber. And really just, you know, go all out and be a director for hire and still produce a very commercial and watchable result. Paths of Glory. I just watched this for the first time. This is a Kirk Douglas film. War movie for World War I, only an hour and a half. I'm going to give it an A because to me it is really... It's one of the most interesting anti-war movies I've seen. It goes in directions you don't expect, and it's not the most combat-focused movie. But the performances are really good. It's in black and white, so it's definitely the oldest movie of his that I've watched. And I'm going to say that it is a fantastic movie that still holds up. You can watch it in 2022 and still get a lot out of it. Joe Turkel is in it, who plays Tyrell in Blade Runner Take a Shot, and also the bartender in The Shining. But there's also some really interesting stuff, and it just shows you that, like, kind of the hypocrisy of war and how, you know, here are these things that these orders that come down from these generals, and then they have to follow through with them, and then actually end up killing their own troops when they fuck up. And the moral conundrums in this movie are really, really interesting and well done. It's really well shot. It looks great in black and white. Sounds great. The performances are fantastic. Kirk Douglas is probably the most straight performance. Just, he's Kirk Douglas, but he's good. And The only thing that's a little weird is it's supposed to be French. It's a French movie, right? Or like it takes place in France in World War One. They're all speaking just English or British. It's fine. You forget about it. You just get into the movie. I can't recommend it enough. This is going to be tough because from here on out, I love these movies. Like Strangelove, Full Metal Jacket, Barry Lyndon, etc., etc. So I'm going to have a hard time with these. But I'm going to put Strangelove in the A tier. Strangelove is a movie I've seen only a couple times compared to the rest. It's also in black and white. It's the 60s. It's about, well, it's also anti-war, but it's done in a way that's like comedic. Peter Sellers is doing comedic performances. There's a lot of like, I guess, contradictions and like dichotomy between like absurdity of what nuclear proliferation would be versus how the people are acting. Famously, Kubrick was asking George C. Scott to do the most ridiculous take, just for fun. Like, just go over the top, do something completely absurd. And George C. Scott was like, this isn't going to make the cut, right? He was like, oh, no, this is just for fun. And then they just kept those takes in the movie. But it's not a laugh out loud funny movie, but it is funny in a lot of spots, and I think the ending is just perfect. The ending was supposed to be a pie fight in the war room, but you know, this is the war room. You can't fight in here. Something like that, right? I would recommend Strangelove any day of the week. It's not that long of a movie. It's very accessible. It still sounds good. It's still funny. That's a tough thing. For a movie to still be funny from the 60s, I think modern like audiences would still get a kick out of it generally. And I think it's got the most overtly comedic tones. However, one of the things I've mentioned on my streams, Kubrick's movies were extremely funny. People view him as like this cold, detached director. I don't see it that way. And I think his movies are funny either overtly or kind of like subversively or just really dark. But it really is kind of a testament to how people view things. Like, some people just see his movies as cold and completely detached and just joyless. I don't at all. Also, you know, people get a kind of a weird vibe about him. Like, you know, who was he really? And he was just some dude from the Bronx. Like, he wasn't some English director reclusive. He was a little reclusive, but I think he just wanted to live a private life. But he was just some dude from the Bronx who had a wry sense of humor, who liked to play chess with his cast. And he also was just a fantastic director who adapted a lot of great source material. So, but the crazy thing is, we're halfway through this, and these are his biggest movies. And his movie output from the 60s on slowed way down. So it's just interesting to see someone like a director that lived to be 70 that had a bunch of movies in the early career, and then it was like a gap of like over 10 years between his penultimate and final movie. I guess we'll go straight to 2001, which will be the first S tier. That was after Strangelove. So, my history with Kubrick movies, I would say 2001 I saw a little bit later on in life, but it still had an effect on me. Maybe not like the way it had an effect on people in the 60s, but it still kind of really made me think. And it was also, I watched it during a time, you know, when I was in college, and sometimes I was enjoying a little bit of the greenery, and so the movie blew my mind in that way and really made me think about a couple things. What could a movie be? What could art be? What is this movie trying to say? This is not the music to discuss this to. Okay. And it also is astounding how 2001 looks really, really good to this day. It was filmed, Douglas Trumbull was the effects guy on this movie, and it was filmed in such a way that it still looks really good. Maybe not modern, but you can watch it and believe the reality of what you're seeing. Really unconventional movie, not a ton of dialogue, not a ton of performances, no real big actors, but it doesn't stop the movie from being engrossing. I think this is a movie that you kind of, it is obviously a very influential movie, but it is kind of a love or hate affair to a degree. You can respect it. You can be like, wow, that's amazing, but you might not like a good chunk of the movie because it's so slow. It has its own like kind of pace to it, and it asks, you know, some big questions, and it doesn't spell it out for you really. But the beginning, the Dawn of Man stuff, you know, the cut from the bone to the spaceship, I mean, that's obvious and iconic. Not much to say there, but what I like about the movie is I like seeing what space life would be, like just the random kind of mundane activities. It's one of the things I love about Alien, but this movie does a really good job at that really early on. Like, it's not Star Wars. Again, that's 10 years later. It's not Star Trek. It's just a couple dudes in a spaceship trying to investigate this strange thing, but they're just eating like gross astronaut food. They're jogging in that cool fucking set. Obviously, this influenced Christopher Nolan quite a bit. But it is kind of crazy to think that this movie was such a trailblazer and was happening before we ever even landed someone on the moon. Allegedly. Maybe Kubrick filmed it. I don't know. But I think that this movie still holds up, and I think people are going to come to it forever and still find something to analyze. And I think that this also kind of elevates the medium of film in a way that, like, a great book is enduring. Well, this movie will endure for another 50 years. Maybe well beyond that. Then, of course, you get the ending, which is just great. You can sync it to Pink Floyd Echoes, which I used to do in college as well. But if you don't, it's still pretty amazing. The effects at the end, the slit scan photography techniques are incredible. The whole sequence with Hal is tense and really intriguing and suspenseful. And then after that, all the bizarre stuff that happens, I can't look away from the screen. I don't think 2001 is a perfect movie, but for what it sets out to do, it does it perfectly. And I like to watch it every couple years, and I still think differently about it every time I watch it. I'm like, oh, wait, does this mean this? I mean, by not spelling it out, it's one of those things that people have speculated for years. What does it mean? You know, what is it all leading to, and why does it end this way? And I think that's the mark of great art too, is when you have something that doesn't obviously kind of tell you what it is, and then you can talk about it, you can think about it. And the fact that 50 years later, more than that now, people are still kind of talking about the ending of this movie a little bit. I think it's just fascinating how it's endured, and will continue to do so, and I love it. But some people won't. You may watch this and say, hey, I'll watch 2001, and you're going to be there. Maybe some of you will be like, no? Where's the spaceships that shoot? Listen, I have a lot of respect for my audience, believe it or not. I do think that a lot of people that watch me are actually more open to stuff like this. But a general audience, right? They may have been spoiled by Marvel films and like Star Wars, and that's fine. I was too. I grew up with Star Wars first. When I came to 2001 later, I was ready for something a little bit different, a little slower, a little bit more introspective. And I think that's where, when you reach a certain point in your life, this movie works for you. So it's a huge movie. I mean, I could talk about this movie more. There's so much to say about it, but I'll leave it at that and just say, yeah, this is his first S-tier film, and obviously one of my favorites. We'll go chronologically from here. So I'm going to do The Shining. I'm going to put that in S-tier. And I'm going to put it behind... You know what? A+. Because I don't think it's quite a perfect movie either. It is close, though. It's really close. Some days I think The Shining is... Do I have to make an A++? Sometimes I think The Shining is the best movie he's made. Wait, why am I doing The Shining? I thought I was going chronologically. All right, forget the chronological thing. I had a fucking brain rot moment there. Sorry, Shining was 80. That's fine. We can skip around. And I'll even tell you a story about The Shining. The next movie after 2001 was Clockwork Orange, but we'll go to The Shining. The Shining is a movie that, for me, I saw too young. I told the story, I think, about I had a classmate that invited the class over. I guess we were in 5th grade, 4th grade, and he didn't tell us why. He was going to watch movies and hang out night. And half the class went, and he showed us The Shining. And people were, terrified. And I don't think very many people hung out with that kid again afterwards. And then he switched schools, which I think is unrelated. I'm pretty sure it's unrelated. But The Shining was a very weird, atmospheric movie to watch as a kid, because again, you're kind of expecting, why isn't there cartoons when you watch it at 10 or 11? But it stuck with me, and the stuff I didn't remember, which was a lot of it, was the stuff that I think was just ingrained in my subconscious. It's not the scariest movie of all time. It may be claiming to do so for some people, oh, it's the scariest movie ever. No, by today's standards, you've probably seen some gore. You've probably seen some crazy shit. But this movie, to me, is probably my favorite horror movie because of the atmosphere. Because of how long it takes to establish this place. The Overlook Hotel. Which is all a set, by the way. The front of it is an actual place. Oh boy. I don't know if this music is appropriate. It's all Barry Lyndon music. Alright. Well, I just like seeing the family. I mean, there's so many allegories that people have got from it, and even if you didn't watch Room 237, you don't think it's about the moon landings, and you're not convinced that Kubrick hid a bunch of stuff in there. The movie, to me, is about a family where the husband has a history of problems, and then he's stuck in isolation. And he loses it. There are videos out there about, were there actually any ghosts in the movie, or is it all in Jack's head? That's an interesting thing. There seem to be ghosts, because they let him out of the freezer. So yeah, there's definitely ghosts in The Shining. But the way it's done is the buildup of tension, the unease, the weird architecture of this. I mean, people overuse liminal space, myself included these days, but the Overlook Hotel absolutely has that. Shelley Duvall, unfortunately, she does give one of the best performances I've ever seen of anyone in a horror movie. Same for Nicholson, was great. And the kid was great too. Danny's amazing. Scatman Crothers, love that guy. He is the heart and soul of the movie in a weird way. But unfortunately, Kubrick, does a million takes. He's known for it. And he was a bastard on this film. And he just kept going and going and going. A lot of his actors say that he was pretty cool and they loved him and they were just willing to, submit to the process, so to speak, and just kind of say, all right, whatever you need me to do, Stanley, I'll do, because you are the man. You're in charge. I want to make this movie. There is the whole thing about Shelley Duvall. Of course, years later, Shelley Duvall suffered mental health issues, so there's going to be connections. People are going to say, okay, is this Kubrick's fault from The Shining? But there are famous stories of him, doing too many takes and being kind of a bastard until he got what he wanted from the actors. And Shelley got it the worst. So that's where I kind of say, fuck, couldn't he have done that without that? But I don't know. I wasn't there. So, of course, I have to address that just for a moment, but regardless, and again, I don't worship people as gods. Even Kubrick, I think he made some of the best movies of all time, but I also feel yeah, he's a human being, and he's not he wasn't this perfect paragon of morality either. So what he did on The Shining, I find personally kind of questionable, but again, I don't know what happened for sure. Most of us don't. So, the results are there on screen, though. As I've said plenty of times, The Shining is one of the best horror movies it could easily go in S tier, but I'm going to give it A plus. And there's a specific time of year where I like to watch this movie, which is right about November, December. So right about now, where the mood just feels perfect. And, you know, they said this on the Blank Check podcast, the carpet is iconic. You know, there's so many scenes where Jack goes to the bartender, where he's in the bathroom talking to Grady, or is it O'Grady? There's him with the axe. There's the hedge maze at the end. There are so many moments in this movie that are incredibly well known, but at its core, it's just a really weird movie of a dude losing his shit, struggling with his addiction, struggling with his writer's block, and his family, and unfortunately, ghosts. But the ghost stuff isn't corny. Sure, there's a teddy bear costume man giving a blowjob. That's stuff we don't talk about that scene. It's a weird one. But other than that, yeah, the twins are horrifying. Some of the ghost stuff, the blood elevator is just, it works for the movie in a way that doesn't feel cheap or corny. And I think this is a movie that still absolutely holds up. And I think it's I think if you're a horror fan that's used to more like gore and stuff, you might not like it as much. But if you like a good suspenseful movie that creates an uneasy atmosphere, the soundtrack, the way it's filmed, the stillness of it, and then the way it ramps up, love it. So good. Shining is great. We'll do Clockwork Orange. I'm going to put Clockwork ahead of The Shining. Again, these are movies that are so close to being S tier, but I'm going to leave them A plus because they're just kind of a little bit shy of the brilliance of 2001 in my opinion. But Clockwork Orange I've had a complicated relationship with. Okay. My first exposure to Clockwork Orange was actually Conker's Bad Fur Day. I didn't know what it was referencing. Sure, I had seen the Droogs, but when I first picked up Conker's Bad Fur Day, it references the beginning of the movie and the end of it and several other things, like with the milk. And I was like, what is this weird fucking movie? And then maybe like a year or two later, I saw it, and it was disturbing. Cathartic in some ways. There were some lessons to be learned from it. Darkly funny, like really funny in some ways, but also when you hear of its reputation, like, oh, this thing was banned in several countries, you can kind of understand why it kind of had these legends around it. But I don't think it's as bad as... I think in the 70s it being banned makes sense. You watch it these days, it's not quite on that level. I think it's more psychologically a little bit fucked up, and just like the depravity of this person, this complete sociopath. The story is pretty light, but it just goes through the events that lead Alex into, you know, where he is at the end, which is to say, does he care? Does he give a shit? Did he learn anything? Probably not, which is different from the book. But I think this movie has its own style. This was like a comparatively low budget movie, especially compared to 2001. It was a movie he made right after that, and here it is analyzing the youth and like the near future, the violence of this culture, and you know how we just let things rot, and how some people just kind of do not give a single shit for another human being. And that's why I think it is also worth kind of taking from this movie and like kind of learning something from it. But again, you will laugh if you watch it. There's some fucking weird scenes, like in the prison in particular. Like some of the fucking performances, some of the weird choices, like the dude that goes into Alex's bedroom. All kinds of stuff. You're not going to get bored watching it. You may be turned off by the movie. My friend Tyler had only seen this movie like 20 years ago, didn't remember it, maybe more than 20. Watched it again recently, and he said, I respect it, it's not for me. The older I get, my relationship to the movie changes. stuff I thought, 15 years ago or more was like cool. Now I look at it like, oh no, that's just getting older, I guess, but I don't respect it any less. But I do think it's weird that the Droogs were in fucking Space Jam 2. And I think it's weird that they have like Clockwork Orange, like merchandise. Like these are not video game characters. These are not role models. That said, though, the performances in this movie, especially Malcolm McDowell, are pretty much next fucking level. And Kubrick actually, when he collaborates this closely with an actor, the results are definitely there. In this case, I think it's probably McDowell's defining performance. And I think that the supporting cast is great. David Prowse is in it. He plays, that's Darth Vader. He plays the bodyguard dude. And he's just like this semi-comedic, imposing figure. But the soundtrack is great. Again, a lot of classical music. I didn't mention that for 2001, but that was supposed to be like a rock soundtrack, like Pink Floyd. But they went classical, which benefits the movie. And Clockwork has its own kind of take on some of this classical stuff. And when it's not, it's just weird synth music. It's just its own strange thing. I think, I forget who did the soundtrack. Wendy something? Let me just check. Music by Wendy Carlos. Yeah, absolutely unbelievable soundtrack. And this is another very quotable movie. This is why I like Kubrick so much, is because there is this iconic quality to so much of his work. Before we move on to the next movie, I will say that I had a Kubrick DVD set in the 2000s. Now, when I get to Full Metal Jacket, I'll tell you, I had watched a lot of that. That was like memes in my school. And I had seen it on HBO. HBO played a lot of Eyes Wide Shut. They played a lot of Full Metal Jacket. And they played The Shining. Well, The Shining I saw separately, so maybe I didn't see it on HBO. I'm not sure. But I bought this DVD box set, and it had Eyes Wide Shut on it. It had The Shining, 2001, Clockwork Orange, and what was the other one? Full Metal Jacket, right? Did I say that twice? Shining. So it had 5. Shining, Clockwork, 2001, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut. Did not have Barry Lyndon. Did not have Strangelove. So I watched those movies later in life. But that DVD set was well worn. And I don't really know why I like this dude's movie so much. I would say he's probably my favorite director. I love Carpenter. Obviously, I love Lynch and Cronenberg. And even more modern directors like, Fincher and Nolan's fine sometimes. There's plenty. Obviously, Denis Villeneuve is great. Ridley Scott, I love, except for when his, filmography is a bit spotty. But Kubrick, to me, every movie I've seen of his has been either iconic or great. So I just think that's a rare thing that he managed to do. And as such, I also feel like a lot of people have said just the more you watch these movies, the more you learn, the more you discover. It's like it's drawing you... Oh, God. Cables. It kind of draws you into its own world. And I feel that that's true of a lot of his movies. But especially Clockwork Orange, and especially because it does take place in the near future. Sorry about the crust. Should be all right now. It kind of does feel like its own thing. And again, it's an adaptation from a book that I have not read, but one day will. Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to put this A+, bordering on S, maybe S. That's going to happen a lot. Barry Lyndon is my favorite Kubrick and one of my favorite movies. It wasn't always that way. This is the movie he made next after Clockwork Orange. He wanted to make a Napoleon thing, but that was already done. And so he scrapped the ideas for Napoleon and he adapted the Barry Lyndon material, source material. Now again, I hadn't seen this movie. because it wasn't on the box set until years later. Probably 10 years ago I saw it for the first time, and I thought, okay, this is good. It's 3 hours long, but it is a period piece about, you know, a dude who just goes through his life from Ireland into, like, you know, the war, into, you know, opulence, just living like a fucking duke, and then his bad luck. And the character of Barry Lyndon, he kind of sucks. His name is John Barry in the first half. And that's it. To me, I think it's interesting they cast Ryan O'Neal, because that dude famously sucks. And this, he plays him kind of well, even though it is kind of a weird, subdued performance, but I think it really works for the character. It is an extremely intoxicating movie. It's really funny. Again, I showed Tyler the movie for the first time, and he said, I wasn't expecting it to be so funny. So he immediately picked up on it. I did too, but not how funny it was until I watched it with him. But I always felt like, how could you sit there and watch a 3-hour period piece about like the 1700s and not be bored to tears? This movie not only pulls that off, it keeps it interesting. You're invested in the characters, in what's going to happen, in the world. And it's so... The soundtrack we've been listening to this whole time, I think, is beautiful. You know, just incredible classical music, and I think some original compositions too. I think Wendy Carlos also did this one. Let's see. Or some of it. No, maybe not. Let me just check real quick. What I will say that's interesting about this is that the person... Yeah, it's just classical music. Bach, Vivaldi, Mozart, Schubert. Yeah. Handel's Sarabande from Keyboard Suite in D minor. Huh. What I will say is that the actor who played Lord Bullingdon later on in the movie, Lyndon's son, basically his stepson, his name is Leon Vitali. After this movie, he quit acting and spent the rest of his life just being Stanley's right-hand man. So this is a dude who changed his entire career. I always found that to be absolutely bizarre and fascinating. But I think he was just like, yeah, I'm better off working with this guy and just doing whatever he needs for his movies, because this is the good shit. And there's a film about him. There's a documentary called Film Worker that I would highly recommend if you like anything Kubrick related. But imagine giving up, like, you know, you work on something, your acting career, and then you work on one movie and you're like, nah, I think I'm done. I think I will now subject myself to whatever random shit this director needs from me. So, to me, that speaks leagues. And he did good work with him later on, too, so that's, I mean, paid off. But I love the performance from him and pretty much everybody. And there's just weird people in this movie that look like they're out of a painting from this time period. And also, I have this on the Criterion Collection. This movie looks so fucking good. The way I've always heard it described was, if you could pause it, if you pause this movie on any frame, it almost kind of looks like a painting from that era. And it does. But, I mean, all of that would fall apart without some compelling narrative. And it kind of gives you a little taste of what life was like in this time, even if it's not fully accurate. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it's utterly fascinating to see what people lived like. Or at the very least, like, the lower class, all the way up to the upper crust. It's all there, and you get to see one dude's mission through it as he connives and just stumbles into things. And it's very interesting, and it's just better every time I've watched it. It's another one of those Kubrick movies where you watch it, you get something out of it, you watch it again, you get more out of it. So yeah, I just think this is my favorite of his movies. It didn't do so great at the box office and was kind of overlooked. And like I said, it wasn't even in that DVD collection. So I didn't know this movie existed, like, for a while. And coming to it later, or, you know, if I knew it existed, I just said to myself, maybe I don't need to worry about this one. I'm glad I eventually watched it because I feel like it's his richest movie. I feel like it's got the most amount of maturity. Well, maybe not the most, but there's a maturity to this movie that still combines his earlier, like, sense of humor, his subversive, like, kind of take on humans' endless capacity for cruelty, and also kind of, you know, fuck the system in a way. Not completely, you know, not as much as Clockwork Orange. And it doesn't even, Clockwork doesn't even say fuck the system. It's just like, well, here it is. This is what it has the capacity for. This is what it does. And then you're just like, oh. And I think this movie does a good job at kind of showing all that stuff and the established kind of, like, the duel stuff. The rules that they have for duels when they're just standing there and they have to, like, you know, I'm sorry, sir, you took your turn. Now you have to wait for this person to shoot you. Like, what? Or even the way war was fought at this time. Like, let's all walk in a straight line across and just shoot. And, oh yeah, you can just take bullets. You're in the front row. Don't worry. You'll be dying gloriously. So it goes through the absurdity of that stuff, and it does it in a way that is both kind of, like, beautiful, but also kind of comedic and dour. I mean, there's some stuff in this movie that is heartbreaking. Like, the end of it in particular, it's like, oh my god. So yeah, it does everything. It's 3 hours, doesn't feel it. I love it. When I show new people this movie, they usually start with, like, oh god. And then they're like, hey, that was pretty great. And I'll give you an example. My buddy Darren, some of you may know, we watched it years ago together. And then years later, he's like, hey Vin, you remember that movie? Barry Lyndon? Can we watch that again? So it has that effect, and I think it's my favorite Kubrick film and one of my favorites ever. Full Metal Jacket. The first half is S. The second half is A+. I'm going to put FMJ for Full Metal Jacket. So this is its own category. Full Metal Jacket was next. After The Shining, he took 7 years. And so again, his output was slowing down, but there were a lot of other projects that he was working on. You know, after I'll say this, after the Barry Lyndon financial situation wasn't that great, Kubrick wanted a hit. So he started doing genre work, and two of the most popular genres in the 80s were horror and war. And so he did a horror movie with The Shining, which was a huge hit. And then he did a war movie, Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket, it was my first genuine exposure to Stanley Kubrick's work because it came out in 1987, and the drill sergeant, Sergeant Hartman, R. Lee Ermey, those lines were a meme for, I didn't realize it, but, like, there were kids coming into class in, like, 3rd, 4th grade doing the lines from fucking Full Metal Jacket. I didn't know what it was. And then I remember a couple other lines from later on in the movie too, some of the funnier ones, if you could, you know, even say that. And when I finally saw it in full, I was like, oh, that's what this is? So, again, I watched it probably too young and thought it was fucking hilarious, you know, until the private pile scene halfway through the movie. But I thought, like, just the things that this fucking drill sergeant was saying, like, who talks like this? What is this insanity? Over a jelly donut? And, like, just the way he insulted Pyle was absolutely absurd, and it made me think, like, is this what the military is? In some ways, this was, like, the best anti-war movie I could have ever watched, because boot camp looked absolutely fucking miserable, and I thought to myself, Vietnam must have been absolutely horrendous. Why would anyone willingly join the war? And then, of course, people were drafted. But yeah, it's just, this movie does a lot. And I think the second half is totally underrated. I think the second half of the movie is incredible in its own way, but the first half is absolutely perfect. And the performances from Vincent D'Onofrio and R. Lee Ermey, and even Matthew Modine, are just phenomenal in the first half. And it's weird, too. It's structured a weird way. It just starts. The movie just starts, and immediately you're into the insults after the head shaving scene. And then you get to see what life is like for these people, and you're just laughing at the absurdity, and then Private Pyle starts getting shit on, like really bad. And then you kind of see how the Marines, this organization, is trying to turn these people into just, this is who you are. You are a killer. The only time, I think maybe one or two times, that Hartman compliments a soldier is when he learns that Pyle can shoot. And it's just kind of, it's eye-opening. Again, I know Hartman was an actual drill sergeant, and I'm sure Kubrick did plenty of work to make sure it was accurate. But this movie, even if it's not 100% accurate, you cannot stop watching. This was one of those movies, every time it was on, I would have to watch the whole thing. Or at the very least, watch the drill sergeant scenes, or the first half of the movie. The soundtrack is very atmospheric, kind of understated. Like, aside from the drill sergeant stuff, later on in the movie, the second half, they just filmed in England, Bexton Gas Works. They didn't even film in a jungle, which again separates it from Platoon or Apocalypse Now, which I love. Apocalypse Now, by the way, one of my favorite movies. But the second half of the movie has its own distinct feel and look at what the Vietnam War might have been like in a more city sense. But seeing the soldiers, just kind of get picked off one by one, the weird dichotomy between, here's this character, here's Joker, who's got this attitude like, oh, well, this war's not going to get to me, I've seen worse. And then by the end, with all the crazy stuff that happens and the quick promotions and everything, and then that sniper scene at the end is just horrifying. I think the second half just deserves as much credit as the first, if it's just not quite on the same level. But yeah, it's great. Full Metal Jacket's great. Seeing the transition from boot camp to war, I think, is kind of, it carves out its own space in the 80s milieu of Vietnam movies or war movies, and it kind of just hasn't been topped as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's the best war movie of all time. I mean, it could be, but it's probably my favorite, and it's the one I've seen the most. And I think it's just a phenomenally unique movie within itself, and it's horrifying. And again, there are scenes that will have you laughing out loud, and you're just like, holy fuck. And then not long after that, you're just horrified. So it deserves its own tier between A+ and S, in my opinion. And again, The Shining could probably go in this tier as well. Same for Clockwork Orange. The only thing I would say for Clockwork and Shining that's a little bit less amazing for me is just, I think it's just a personal choice. I think it's just as I get older, at one point Clockwork was my favorite Kubrick. I think getting older, just kind of oh god, it's still amazing, but is it on the same level of brilliance as 2001 and Barry Lyndon? I'm not sure. And on some days, I would say Clockwork is even better than Full Metal Jacket. But, when I do my tier lists, things do change. And, my Pink Floyd tier list would be different now than it was even last time I did it, because Wish You Were Here may be my favorite now. So I don't know. Hard to say. Very, very tough to firmly say. That's why I kind of, when I do these, I say, listen, these change all the time. And I have no idea how to objectively say this is the best movie. And, my tastes change, and my opinions do change a little bit over time. Eyes Wide Shut, I'm going to put it at the end of A+. So I do think Clockwork and Shining are better, but I'm going to put it there because this is another movie I like to watch every couple years around Christmas time because that's when it's set. Eyes Wide Shut is another meme movie. The singing, the weird song in it, and of course the orgy scene that's definitely not sex. Alright, well in this movie it is. I say orgy, it's just a sex party in some rich, person's mansion. Some maybe Illuminati, who knows? No one knows really, it doesn't matter. This movie is like a dream, and you know what? There are times where this is an A movie. And maybe I will put it there because it is very slow-paced, and sometimes when I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, there's definitely some indulgence here. And I'm going to leave it in the A tier for now. Let me think about this, but let me talk my way through it. So, of course, I had seen this movie 1,000 times on HBO, and then my cousin and I used to joke about it, because we would just watch it whenever it was on and be like, yo, did you see that shit? What was that? And we didn't know it was like this famous director's movie. We didn't even know it was the same guy who did Full Metal Jacket. But it had all these different elements that made it so fucking weird. I mean, aside from the strange mask sequence, which was the best part of the movie, New York looked a little weird. There's the strange, stuff that he has to go through afterwards. There's the whole scene with the prostitute. I mean, everything in this movie just feels a little bit off. And I think the theme of the movie is like relationships and sex, but it also covers like the upper class in modern day. So it kind of, again, goes back to that Kubrick thing where he kind of examines this. There's obviously conspiracy theories like, oh, Kubrick was killed because he made this movie. He got too close to the truth. There's also conspiracy theories that he had to cut certain scenes because it was, again, too close to the truth. So there's apparently a cut of this movie that's longer and different and has a bunch of different things in it. And I've seen hour-long analysis videos about Eyes Wide Shut. So to me, that's the most interesting and engaging stuff. Tom Cruise is fine in the movie. I think it's probably one of his better performances because it's so understated compared to his, massive personality, especially in Magnolia. This is the anti-Magnolia movie. Nicole Kidman is good too, but again, it kind of uses them as props. I mean, they were really married at this time, and he kind of locked them in a room to do these scenes for months, and it eventually kind of ruined their relationship. They were all for it because they wanted to work with Kubrick, and by now he had this legendary, reputation, like some mystic, which, again, just a dude from the Bronx. But he managed to get all these people to basically do whatever kind of stuff he needed for the movies. And I think an understated Tom Cruise is a good Tom Cruise. I think he does a good job in the movie. But I love the supporting cast. There's the Red Cloak. There's the dude, the rich dude. I forget. It's like Sidney. I forget who it is. Sidney Pollack, maybe. I probably am wrong, but the guy who plays the rich dude that has the prostitute OD in his bathroom. There's the weird Christmas party, and all these actors that play these super rich people, or any of these supporting characters make the movie that much more interesting and bizarre. And as a New Yorker, seeing New York as recreated on a set, it has a weird familiar feeling, but also not. And I think it was based on something called Dream something, but the book rather, or the novella. But the thing is, it does kind of almost feel like that. When you're watching the movie, the way it looks, the way it sounds and feels, it kind of does feel like you're viewing New York from a dream. I've talked about on my stream before how sometimes I have dream locations that are based on real locations, but they're just slightly bastardized and off. This feels like that for New York City. So this is a movie I watch and I show people, and some people love it. Some people are like, okay, that was a little boring, but there are times where I watch it and I do think it is a little boring. And I'm like, okay, I know the good stuff. I can't wait for it to get to the good stuff, but also, how do you cut when it's supposed to be a build? Like, as someone who edits, I'm not like a professional, I like doing it, and I edit garbage compared to this, but you kind of get a sense for like how a scene needs to build to something, even if it's seconds. But when you're making a movie like this, I can imagine if you cut out 5 minutes here, a minute here, it just kind of starts to feel different. So I don't think the movie could have been changed too much. Maybe there is a better cut, and Stanley would have done that had he lived. And he died before the movie released, like a week before. So that's kind of crazy. But I do think it's in some ways his most personal movie. Will you explain that? No. But I kind of think it's one of his most personal movies. And maybe a look into how he feels about certain things, but also this one feels more detached and less funny than most of his other stuff. Fascinating, not particularly comedic, and I think a very cold look at the world, more so than his other stuff, which maybe is how he got his reputation, which I, again, do not agree with. So I'm going to leave it in the A category, which is still an A. And again, I'm skewing this chart so much because I just think that all of it's good. Also, we made it through the entire Barry Lyndon soundtrack. This is the end and first song of it. And so that's actually not my plan, but I'm glad it happened. So I guess what I would say here is I just love this dude's movies. They are endlessly rewatchable. He may be my favorite director. I don't mean to get all highfalutin about it, because I love The Room. I love the Super Mario Brothers movie. And I love comic book movies from time to time, too, if they're really good. Like, Civil War, you know? And, Ant-Man. No, maybe not Ant-Man, but they're fine. I like all kinds of shit. My movie, Top 100 is probably different by now. It is, by the way. But it's available if you want to watch it. The thing is, I do like a wide variety of things, and I like mostly sci-fi and genre. But this dude covered different genres, including sci-fi, to horror, to war. And I think, yeah, everything he did was a little different. And then he also managed to do it in his own way, with his own style, and did it really, really well. So, obviously, I don't need to say this, but Kubrick will go down as one of the best directors, and I think people will always kind of come to his films. I would recommend them if you haven't seen them. There was some Kubrick stuff at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, which is great. I love that place. And I do think it's worth seeing these movies in their highest quality, just because they are really beautiful to look at. And, I'll say one more thing about conspiracy stuff with Kubrick. Because of the mysterious nature of some of his movies and his life and everything, people seem to think that every single thing he put on screen was deliberate. Every little tiny thing. But remember, movies are made by a lot of people. And also, you discover a lot on set. One of the quotes from Kubrick was something like, you can plan as much as you want. You can go over it 1,000 times. But until you get to the set and you start looking for shots that day, you're not really going to get what you want. So, while I do think he was a perfectionist, he did way too many takes. And he was able to kind of beat his actors down to get exactly what he wanted from them, metaphorically. I think that he also had a spontaneous side. R. Lee Ermey in Full Metal Jacket is a good example of that. But, that's the beauty of creation, is you don't always plan every single thing out, and you discover stuff as it's happening or along the way. And I think that comes through in his movies, and I don't think he's hiding too much crazy shit in his movies. I'm sure there's subtext, and I know that people have discovered a lot of it. I think The Shining is about, a father and son abusive relationship more than it is ghosts. But, there's definitely stuff there. Is it as overt as some people would say? I'm not sure. So yes, do I think he's a genius? I think so. I think if you're in the film department looking to use that word, which is a very loaded word, I think Kubrick comes closest to almost anyone. So that's it. That's my tier list. I hope you enjoyed, or at least got something a little bit out of this. And I appreciate you giving me the ability to talk about this random shit. And go watch some movies. See you next time.